The Vikings' valiant comeback falls short versus the Steelers in Ireland. That's the topic for today, Sunday, September 28th, on Believe in Vikings, presented by FanDuel. And I'm your host, Mike Wobschall, with you immediately after the Vikings' 24-21 loss to the Pittsburgh Steelers from Dublin, Ireland, in a game that turned from ugly for Minnesota into dramatic for Pittsburgh and for both teams, as the Steelers fumbled away decision after decision in the fourth quarter and left open the door for a comeback for the Vikings. But the Vikings fall just short. Today, on this post-game edition of Believe in Vikings, presented by FanDuel, we'll go over some of the key moments, talk about some of the takeaways and stats from the game, and then look ahead to next week's game for the Minnesota Vikings as they stay across the pond and go across the Irish Sea, fly over Wales, land in London to play a game against the Cleveland Browns. But first, are you a leader at your business? Listen up. Sorting through resumes, trying to get in touch with potential candidates, finding candidates, but they're not actively looking for jobs. It's frustrating. Well, the future of hiring looks much brighter because ZipRecruiter's latest tools and features help speed up finding the right people for your roles, so you save valuable time. And now you can try ZipRecruiter for free at ZipRecruiter.com/audio. Use ZipRecruiter and save time hiring. 4 out of 5 employers who post on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate within the first day. And if you go to ZipRecruiter.com/audio right now, you can try it for free. ZipRecruiter.com/audio. ZipRecruiter, the smartest way to hire. All right, so the Vikings fall short by 3 points to the Pittsburgh Steelers, their first loss in the NFL's international series in 5 games. And it comes to a Pittsburgh Steelers team that entered the game with a 2-1 record, same as the Minnesota Vikings. And the Vikings, while in fairly unfamiliar territory, even though they've been over there as part of the international series 5 times now, they faced a familiar nemesis in quarterback Aaron Rodgers, who played much better in the first half than he did in the second. In fact, you can say that about the entire Pittsburgh Steelers operation, which carried a 14-6 lead into the locker room at halftime, but then struggled mightily in the fourth quarter and almost gave this game away to the Minnesota Vikings. So let's go over, before we get to some general takeaways and before we start to draw some conclusions from the game and look ahead to Cleveland, let's go over some of the key takeaways or key moments of this Vikings contest, a loss to the Pittsburgh Steelers. We'll start, of course, in the first half and on the Vikings' first offensive possession, where the defense forces the Steelers to go 3 and out, thanks largely to a sack by Jalen Redmond on the play's first game that put the Steelers into a 2nd and 18 situation. So the Vikings get the ball. On their first possession, Jordan Mason rips off a pretty nice run, but at the end of it, he fumbles the ball. It is recovered by Steelers cornerback Jalen Ramsey and returned for a touchdown. However, after review, which all plays that result in a turnover and a score are reviewed, the review showed that while the ball was loose on the ground and Jordan Mason was trying to recover it, he was touching the ball while also a part of his body was out of bounds, which signals, or which means the play is dead. No one had possession, so possession goes back to the offensive team. So the Vikings retain possession. The touchdown gets wiped off the board for the Steelers, and the game's first big break went to the Minnesota Vikings. The Vikings turned that break into a field goal and a 3-0 lead. The Steelers, however, responded, and they responded firmly by scoring touchdowns over the next 2 drives to build a 14-3 lead. The Vikings were trying to respond to that and mounting a drive that got to midfield, and that's when Steelers defensive lineman Derek Harmon tipped a pass, which was then picked off by Steelers safety Deshaun Elliott, and that ended what looked to be a pretty good Vikings offensive drive. And at that point, Carson Wentz was playing well. He hadn't thrown many incompletions, if any at all. That interception was one of his first ones. But that promising drive was stalled. Now the Steelers take that turnover and they drive to get into field goal range with just under 2 minutes to go, where their field goal attempt is blocked by none other than Isaiah Rodgers, the reigning NFC Defensive Player of the Week, off of his 2 touchdown and multiple forced turnover performance last week against the Bengals. He blocks a field goal. The Vikings offense takes that momentum, drives down the field, and is able to get a field goal of their own. And that's what made it 14-6 going into the locker room at halftime. And I was texting with frequent guest of Believe in Vikings, former Viking safety Anthony Harris, at halftime of the game. And I said, hey, man, if you're the Steelers, you lead 14-6, but you're not feeling great because you feel like there's a lot of points you left out there on the field. If you're the Vikings, you're sitting there being like, man, we did not play very well. We could have made a lot more big plays. If not for one or two things, maybe this game would be tied or at least closer, or maybe we'd even be in the lead. But, we've got a lot of opportunities out there. So I thought, although the Steelers had a lead going into the locker room at halftime, I thought the Vikings were in a little bit better position for the second half. The second half begins in the third quarter. Not a lot of huge moments, really, in the third quarter. I guess an interception by TJ Watt on another promising Vikings drive was probably the first biggest moment in the second half. TJ Watt and Cam Hayward both were in position to bat down a ball, and TJ Watt, his hands got on it first, and the ball ends up in his hands for an interception, and the Steelers take that turnover, turn it into a touchdown on a Kenneth Gainwell rush, which made it 21-6. And at this point in the game, the reaction by Vikings fans, obviously very negative, a lot of consternation in Vikings Nation. But the Vikings that were in the stadium in Ireland didn't give up, and certainly the Vikings who were on the field didn't give up, because they ended up mounting a comeback into the fourth quarter. They score to make it 21-14. After the touchdown, they go for two, which is how they got from 6 to 14. So now you've got, a pretty close game. Pittsburgh adds a field goal, and where it gets really interesting is when Pittsburgh recovers the onside kick from Minnesota. Actually, one key moment before that was when the Steelers had the ball near the goal line for Minnesota. And the question was, do you kick a field goal to go up by 13? Because the score is 24-14. You have it 4th and goal inside the 5-yard line. You can kick a field goal to go up by 13, or you can go for it, try and score a touchdown, which would seal the game, knowing that if you don't convert the touchdown, you don't get any points and it remains a 10-point game, but Minnesota has the ball inside their own 5. And after some indecision where Steelers head coach Mike Tomlin, wanted to kick a field goal, Rodgers was waving him off. Tomlin said, no, we're kicking. The offensive linemen were starting to wave the field goal unit off. Finally, the Steelers decide to go for it. The Vikings stand firm. They hold the Steelers out of the end zone, and the game remains a 10-point game. The Vikings are backed up, but it doesn't take them very long to dig out of that hole. Jordan Mason on the first play gets a run of about 7 or 8 yards, and then a couple of moments later, Carson Wentz finds Jordan Addison for a long play all the way down inside the Steelers' 5-yard line, where the Vikings are set up 1st and goal, and after 3 plays, the Vikings get into the end zone. They score a touchdown. They tack on the extra point. It's now a 3-point game at 24-21. The Steelers recover the onside kick. On the plus side of the 2-minute warning, the Vikings have a timeout, which means the Vikings have a chance, if they can hold the Steelers from getting a first down, to get the ball back. And that's exactly what happens. The Steelers again had a 4th and short, like a 4th and 1, where they could have gone for it. If they convert, they ice the game, or they could punt the ball away. And coming off of that goal line stand a few minutes earlier, Mike Tomlin this time does decide to use the kicking game, and he punts it away. And the punt goes out of the end zone, and the Vikings begin their last possession on the 20-yard line, down by 3, with a chance to mount a drive that results in a game-tying field goal, or maybe a touchdown, and they could win the game. Carson Wentz and company, however, are unable to do that. A couple of Steelers penalties prolonged the drive, but the Vikings just ran out of time and they ran out of downs. The game ended on a 4th and 17 incompletion, which was batted down by the Steelers secondary. In a game where Carson Wentz truthfully just didn't play very well and was not able to manage that comeback for the Minnesota Vikings. So those were the key moments in the game. We're going to break down a couple of stats and some key takeaways from this one as well. But first, want to thank my friends at Nutrition Elements, namely the founder, Evan Bosma. Today's episode of Believe in Vikings is sponsored by Nutrition Elements, a Minnesota-based company with premium bleep cubes, lion's mane, and more. Nutrition Elements meticulously crafts every formula, blending cutting-edge research with nature's finest ingredients, pure, potent, and designed for a wholesome approach to wellness. Free shipping on orders of $150 or more. Now, please use the promo code Wobby to get 15% off your order. That's WOBBY. Get 15% off your order at nutritionelements.com. Fuel your mind, elevate your wellness. Before we get into some of the key takeaways, let's go over some of the stats from this game to give you a little bit of a picture of who played well and who didn't. Carson Wentz, who's playing obviously for an injured J.J. McCarthy and led the Vikings to a victory last week. Not a great outing. He was 30 of 46 for 350 yards. And those numbers are pretty good. 350 yards is good. But he took 7 sacks in this game, which ended up losing them over 50 yards. While he did have 2 touchdowns, he also threw 2 interceptions. So Carson needs to do a better job of holding on to the football. That's he also had a fumble, which he didn't lose. But he's putting the ball on the ground and he's putting the ball in harm's way. And as a quarterback, whether you're a starter or you're a backup, those are things that you can't do. That's your number one job, is to take care of the football. And Carson Wentz did not do that against the Pittsburgh Steelers. To his defense, I will say there are 2 other groups that need to do a better job. And we'll start with the one that's tougher to maybe explain or articulate. And that's some of the play calling and the situations that you're putting the quarterback in. Now, sometimes game tempo dictates your run-pass balance, but I don't think that in preparing for a game, Kevin O'Connell is certainly experienced and smart enough to realize that Carson Wentz throwing the ball 46 times is not how you're going to try and win this game. But that's what ended up happening for the Vikings. They had to put Carson Wentz on 46 dropbacks. They gave Jordan Mason just 16 carries. So I thought they started to run the ball, or they began the game committed to the run, but the game script got into a flow that dictated more passing, I guess, is maybe what Kevin O'Connell will say. But I think when they pull this game apart, Kevin O'Connell and Wes Phillips, the offensive coordinator, will certainly look at next week when we play the Cleveland Browns in London. How can we get this run-pass balance a little bit more in tune here so we have more runs? And you don't have 46 dropbacks for Carson Wentz on a day when you're facing a pass rushing siege from the Steelers and you have injuries along your offensive line. You're asking Carson Wentz to drop back 46 times. That's just not the way to get it done. The Steelers had a much better run-pass balance in this game, and they ended up winning the game, of course, and they held a lead for the balance of the game, which makes it a lot easier to run the ball. But the Steelers ran the ball 29 times, and Aaron Rodgers had only 22 dropbacks. And, yeah, he had fewer passing yards. He had 200, but he didn't turn the ball over, although he had a fumble that he didn't lose. He had no interceptions, and he was only sacked twice. So, I think when you look at the run pass, the play calling, there's certainly some areas where the Vikings are going to feel like they can improve and get a lot better next week when they play the Cleveland Browns. The second thing that we need to talk about in defense of Carson Wentz and of the Minnesota Vikings in this game is the injuries that they faced, particularly along the offensive line. In a game where they entered without starting left guard Donovan Jackson because of an injury, they also lost their starting center, Ryan Kelly, because he's being evaluated for yet another concussion after having already suffered a concussion this season. And they also lost right tackle Brian O'Neill, who is their longest tenured and arguably best or second best offensive lineman behind Christian Darrisaw. So those 2 guys go down. You already were missing Donovan Jackson, and the Pittsburgh Steelers, who have a very, very good defensive front, absolutely took advantage of that situation. And they were after Carson Wentz the entire game, and they dominated the line of scrimmage even in the run game, where Jordan Mason was held to 57 yards on 16 carries. That's a per carry average of only 3.6 yards, no touchdowns, and a long rush of 9 yards for Jordan Mason. So up front in the trenches, when the Vikings offense was on the field and the Steelers defense was on the field, Pittsburgh dominated up front. at the line of scrimmage, in large part because of the injuries that the Vikings were facing. And those injuries are not a one-game situation here for Minnesota. We don't know how long Donovan Jackson is going to be out. We don't know Ryan Kelly's situation as he's dealing with perhaps yet another concussion. And we don't know the severity of Brian O'Neill's injury, but it didn't look good when he was on the field. So this is something that's going to bear monitoring going forward, but the Vikings are banged up front, and this is very disappointing for them because they spent a big part of their offseason plan and a big part of their cap and cash on addressing the offensive line with free agent signings. And right now it's not panning out because of unavailability due to injury. So that's a big bummer for the Minnesota Vikings. A couple of other minor takeaways before we wrap this up and take a look at the Cleveland Browns. Jalen Redmond splashed early in this game. He had 2 sacks, both in the first half. One was on the first play of the game, so you like what you saw from him. A great plan by Kevin O'Connell and Wes Phillips to get Justin Jefferson involved early in this game. I believe he had 6 catches in the first half of this game. I've got the stat sheet pulled up right here. Let's see if I can get a first half summary. I can. Justin Jefferson, first half, 8 targets, 8 catches, 97 yards. Great plan by the Vikings in the first half to get their best player involved. He was a factor early on. If not for a couple of slips on the turf, I think Jefferson would have had even more yards and maybe even a touchdown, because after a catch, he slipped in the open field where he had one man to beat about 15 yards outside of the end zone. And my money's on Jefferson there. So I love the plan early. However, he only had 2 catches the rest of the game. So the Steelers obviously did a very good job of adjusting. Kenneth Gainwell for Pittsburgh. My, oh my, was he impressive, filling in for an injured Jaylen Warren on the afternoon. Kenneth Gainwell, 19 carries, 99 yards, 2 touchdowns on the ground. He had 6 catches for 35 yards. Kenneth Gainwell, starting for Jaylen Warren, was a star in this game. He was a member of the Philadelphia Eagles team last year that won the Super Bowl, along with Isaiah Rodgers, along with Darius Slay, couple of Super Bowl winning members from last year in this game. Kenneth Gainwell was the best of the bunch with over 100 yards from scrimmage and 2 touchdowns. Absolutely a factor in this one. Aaron Rodgers played a clean game, 18 of 22 for 200 yards. Last week when we were taking a look at FanDuel, a presenting sponsor of Believe in Vikings, one way I wanted to bet this game, I thought it was an under game, but I didn't want to take under 40.5 because I thought that number was too low, even though it was an under type of game, which ended up being right because the game finished at 45. So I'm glad we laid off the under there. But one way I wanted to bet this game was to take under on Aaron Rodgers passing yards, which were 202.5, and he finished with 200. So we would have hit on that one. Finding an alternate way to bet the under or to bet in an under type of game. We also took under 4.5 touchdowns on the game, and the game ended up with 5. So we're a wash there trying to bet this game for the Vikings and the Steelers, taking under on Rodgers passing yards, which we hit, and taking under on total touchdowns, which we did not. Jordan Addison back after a 3-game suspension. He had 4 catches for 114 yards, including an 81-yard reception late in the game that gave the Vikings a little bit of life, set up their touchdown to pull within 3 points. So good to see him back on the field and playing well. And again, Carson Wentz finishes 30 of 46 for 350 yards, 2 touchdowns, 2 picks, was sacked 7 times. We will see what happens with J.J. McCarthy and his injury situation as he recovers from an ankle injury. They showed him on the sidelines a bunch of times in this game. He looked fine. And the broadcast crew of Joe Davis and Greg Olson and Jamie Erdahl and Pam Oliver did mention that McCarthy may be running the scout team this week in London as the Vikings prepare for their game against the Cleveland Browns, as he tries to get his legs back underneath him and start preparing to get back out onto the field. Preliminary reports were that McCarthy would be out until after the Vikings bye, which is the week after their game next week against Cleveland. But perhaps with the way things went today against the Steelers, the struggles that the offense has faced with Carson Wentz as the quarterback, perhaps they will try and push McCarthy to play this week. I don't think that will happen, but I think it's another thing that bears monitoring. So injuries definitely a factor here early in the season for the Minnesota Vikings. They got to patch something together to put a good effort to try and beat the Cleveland Browns on Sunday. Then they get a week off and they can try and heal up some of those injuries. The Cleveland Browns, by the way, playing right now as we record this podcast, they're up on the Detroit Lions 7-0 early in this game. Quinshon Judkins with a 1-yard run to stake the Browns to an early 7-0 lead. The Green Bay Packers play tonight on Sunday Night Football against the Dallas Cowboys. The Chicago Bears, They are in Las Vegas for a 3:25 Central Time game against the Raiders. So that's going to do it for this episode of Believe in Vikings. The Vikings drop a close game to the Pittsburgh Steelers, a game in which they were down big but came back valiantly in the fourth quarter and then came up just short. So they got a rebound, put something together. They will play the Cleveland Browns next Sunday in London. We'll be talking about that game all week here on Believe in Vikings. Not sure if I'll be able to connect with my man Brian McKinney. He is in Ireland right now and will be in London for the Vikings game next week. So not sure if he and I will be able to record together, but I'll be here previewing the Vikings and the Browns all week, and maybe we can run down our guy Anthony Harris and get him on the show as well. On behalf of everyone here at Believe in Vikings, I want to thank FanDuel for sponsoring the show, and I want to thank you for watching and for listening. If you're not already, make sure you subscribe to Believe in Vikings, and then every time we drop an episode, it gets delivered right to you automatically, and then you won't miss a beat of what we cover here on Believe in Vikings. Again, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. This is Wobby signing off for now. Until next time, everyone, always remember, keep believing.